Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Sara. Sara, how are you doing?
Good, thanks, lad.
And also by Alex Weiss, who's joining us from Germany. Alex, how are you doing?
Good, thanks to yourself, Nick. Always a privilege to stand in when colleagues are doing important things like making presentations to Parliament. So, it's a pleasure to be here.
Indeed. And I'm sure that's Terence Corrigan, and I'm sure he'll be able to tell us a little bit about it tomorrow, which will be quite interesting. But anyway, thanks very much for being on the show, Alex. Let me just get started off with a word from our sponsor. So, of course, as you guys know, our sponsor today is Bitvice. And they say Bitcoin is the complete hedge against the global debasement of money, inflation, and government overreach. Bitvice is a South African-first, Bitcoin-only self-custody solution that helps individuals and entities buy and hold Bitcoin for the long term. Bitvice believes that everyone should hold their own Bitcoin and trust no one else. Recently, there have been a plethora of crypto custodians going bankrupt, taking their clients' Bitcoin with them. That's why Bitvice never holds your Bitcoin. They send it immediately to your own Bitcoin wallet where you hold the keys. If they don't hold your keys, they don't hold your coins. If you'd like to use their services, simply sign up with Bitvice, link your bank account, and securely buy Bitcoin in seconds. Visit bitvice.io and begin your journey in buying and securing the scarcest asset that mankind has ever created. And we thank them very much for sponsoring us. So let's dive into the stories for today. The first one, we're not really going to talk about it, but it's just an update on something we talked about yesterday. We talked yesterday about the latest big fracture in the Congress of the People political party. This once titan on the South African political stage was just shrunk to a very small party now. And there was a press conference this morning where members physically attacked each other. So it's very sad to see, but yeah, I struggle to see how COPE is really going to pull itself out of this one. Sad stuff. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the Phala Phala scandal. So this has, of course, been dominating a lot of the news around the country for the past couple of weeks. And President Cyril Ramaphosa has, shall we say, I think, not really given a great account of himself, considering this is the first scandal to really hit hard at him personally and his credibility. Up till now, Ramaphosa has made a pretty good show of kind of staying above the corruption and scandal that infests the ANC. But this one has really hit him, and he was before Parliament yesterday answering questions. The president, of course, has to account to Parliament regularly. And yeah, it was, I watched bits and pieces of it, not the whole thing. It was, I don't know what the polite word for it is, but a mess, I suppose. Firstly, it started off with the EFF holding up things for hours by raising lots of very spurious points of order. And that went on for a while. And then eventually the president got asked some questions. There was asked a question, the DA, about whether he supports the xenophobic comments of some of his ministers. And he started off his non-answer by saying, our foreign policy is much admired across the world. So that was the general tone of things. Ramaphosa ducking and diving furiously. And then finally, he had to answer a question from the ATM, African Transformation Movement, which has long been rumored to be basically a puppet organization of the Jacob Zuma faction. And there was so much disruption and they were so delayed that the speaker did something that I believe is unprecedented and said, well, we've wasted too much time on this. We need to move on to the next thing on the order paper. We are not going to answer this last question. We'll just figure out what to do about it tomorrow at a chief whips meeting between all the big political parties. Yeah, so Ramaphosa didn't answer the question and said, for the most part, I don't have to answer this. My lawyers, it's all before courts and things. My lawyers have advised me not to. Which, of course, the EFF, ATM, DA, and all the other opposition parties were not particularly happy about. At the same time, the Reserve Bank has said that Ramaphosa has until next week to provide more details on where the US dollars that were stolen from his house, and this is part of the Phala Phala scandal, came from. Ramaphosa has always said that they came from the sale of game animals, but the Reserve Bank says that he did not, in fact, declare this money to them and may have violated exchange controls or capital controls, foreign exchange controls rather. And his lawyers have apparently not given sufficient details that the Reserve Bank is looking for. He originally had 21 business days to respond to the Reserve Bank. They granted him an extension of 15 working days, and he seems to have not provided the answers they wanted yet. And so he has until next week. I don't know what happens if he refuses, because he's, of course, the president. All of this has led yesterday during Parliament, DA leader John Steenhuisen to describe Ramaphosa's non-answering of the Phala Phala stuff as Nkandla 2.0. So, Sara, my first question to you is this. Do you think that this could be as damaging to Ramaphosa as Nkandla was to Zuma?
Well, people admire our foreign policy, but notwithstanding that, I think it could be, and I think he might be faced with the Al Capone option, in that if you've got SARS and the Reserve Bank after you, there are no more egalitarian bodies within our government system than SARS and Reserve Bank. I don't think his status is going to mean very much. And, look, the problem, he's got dollars, he didn't declare them. It doesn't matter why he has the dollars there or how he got them there. But the problem is that the more he prevaricates, the more we will assume that they did not come from kosher sources. And it's not going to help him any. I mean, that's going to hit him, but despite the fact that his lawyers have said he shouldn't talk and it's sub judice, the problem is that sub judice is a nonsense. It doesn't exist anymore, and you actually have to have, for sub judice to have been relevant, you have to actually have a matter in court. So people have often pleaded the fifth or called it sub judice because they don't want to talk about it. And often they've been sort of a little bit left off the hook, but it's actually nonsense. He owes us an explanation. I think, like many people who are brought down in this sort of situation, what is going to hobble Cyril in the end is less the problem of the money than the way he's dealt with talking about it or not talking about it, as the case may be. And that's, I think, what turns it into potentially Nkandla 2.0. I certainly, I think it's fodder for his enemies, and which makes it even worse. So presumably, whatever the answer is, he's going to be damned if he says it and damned if he doesn't say it. So good luck to him.
So, Alex, our colleague Herman has made a big deal about how he thinks that Ramaphosa has not responded to this scandal with much political skill. And I must say, I tend to agree with him there. This just seems really poor form. And what's shocking is that Ramaphosa just doesn't seem to have anything like a clear answer. When I first heard the details of this, the money being here, I thought, oh, well, this seems sort of par for the course. It's not particularly spectacular. I'm sure this will hurt him a little bit. But then Cyril responded to the whole crisis with just this kind of odd defensive ducking and diving and dodging and dipping. And it really doesn't seem to have helped him out much. In fact, it just seems to get worse every time he has to address the matter, which for me, I think is not a good sign for his longevity as a political force. But I don't know. Firstly, do you agree with that assessment? And secondly, how do you see the scandal? What do you see the current state of the scandal? Do you think it's going away anytime soon?
Yeah, I think he really is caught between a rock and a hard place by being the leader of the ANC. I think there's a lot more to this than probably meets the eye. But I think possibly he joined the cohort of ANC members who went to seek advice from Nkandla in this week to learn how to stall and how to delay answering questions and delaying your accountability. But no, on a more serious note, I think that like I said, I think there's more to it. And I think it's really just a matter of waiting for it to really blow up in his face and all the authorities to do what they need to do, the Reserve Bank, all these other players. And I suspect I think the problem that he finds himself in together with the ANC is that every day that passes is a day closer to the elections in 2024, and it's going to just come, and that's going to be weaponized against him. So he may as well stall. But it's that could ultimately actually even undermine the ANC's 2024 efforts even worse. The longer this draws out. But in the meantime, it demoralizes. Demoralizes is the wrong word, but it really diminishes Ramaphosa's image, especially those, as they have been termed, like Ramaphoriacs. But people who found a lot of hope in his presidency when he came to power in 2017, or at least of the ANC. And I think every day that goes past, when people see this kind of stuff, any sort of hope they had or comfort in his leadership they had, I think wanes every day, unfortunately, for him.
No, I think I very much agree with that. And I guess, Sara, the last sort of question to you perhaps is, before the Phala Phala scandal, I think it's pretty fair to say that pretty much no one expected Ramaphosa to face any serious competition at the ANC's elective conference for leadership at the end of the year. Do you still think that's the case? Do you think Cyril's going to be able to sail through, or do you think he's in any sort of danger of being dethroned as king of the ANC?
You know, the only reason why he mightn't, and this was a point I was going to raise, is the fact that the opposition, or the potential opposition, is so bad. And there is the lingering thought, although I agree with Alex, I think it's diminished him considerably, is his popularity was almost twice that of the ANC. So the ANC has been relying on his popularity to get them through his election for second term and through 2024. And now, even if he is elected, even if nobody takes over from him, whether it's him or somebody else, it's just not going to have the heft that it would otherwise have had, such as it is. So let's be frank, it's good news for the opposition parties.
Very much so. But now it's time for the opposition parties to make what hay they can out of this, because the ANC is still going to be probably the country's biggest party and not to be underestimated. Anyway, let's move on to our next topic. And this is, I think, kind of actually related to our first story. And this is the quarterly announcement of party political funding. So every quarter now, donations above a certain amount, I can't remember how much it is. I think it's 500,000 rand, something like that. No, sorry, it's above 100,000 rand, I think, have to be declared to the Independent Electoral Commission and revealed to the public, so you can see precisely who is funding which political party. And for the first time, I believe, since this reporting came out, the DA got significantly more funding in the last quarter from official sources than did the ANC, which is, I think, says something to me about the fact that the ANC is really struggling to pull in money. Not least the fact that they keep getting money and yet are still unable to pay their staff and all that sort of things, which suggests that maybe your money is not going to great use if you give it to the ANC, even if you support them. But anyway, so some of the big donors to the various political parties, Fynbos, Ekwitted is a insurance company that gave 15 million rand to the DA, which is, I believe, the limit that you can give as a single donation per quarter. They also got a little bit of money from, I think it's the Dutch political party, the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, and they got some in-kind donations from the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, which is the liberal foundation in Germany. Action SA got not that much money. They got less than 1 million rand in the last quarter, most of it from Style Eyes of California Limited. The ANC got 10 million rand from Bato Commercial Enterprises, and the Patriotic Alliance got about 300,000 rand from Gayton McKenzie himself. So nothing too spectacularly interesting in here, except for me, I think, the continued glaring absence of the EFF. So the EFF did report one donation through official channels. I think it was last quarter. So that was the last quarter of 2021.
Not this quarter.
But apart from that, the EFF, despite being South Africa's third largest party, and based on the size of their events, the fact they can bus people around the country, the fact that Julius Malema arrives in helicopters to places sometimes, it's kind of weird that they they say that they don't receive any donations. And I am rather concerned that the IEC has said not a single word about this fact. That seems glaringly suspicious to me. Alex, am I being unfair here? Do you think the EFF really is, as they claim, surviving entirely off of parliamentary stipends?
Sure, if they are, they know how to make money go further than I've been taught to.
Right, they run at such efficiency that they cannot be matched. In fact, maybe they should run the economy then.
Yeah, let's deploy them into the finance ministry. But no, I think it makes such a mockery of the system, unfortunately. And every time one of these reports come out, the same omission is there. And they mentioned in the statement that they're working on it and they're looking at how they report it, etc., etc. So it's obviously a work in progress. It's a new act that they're implementing. But if there's no accountability mechanism, then carrot or stick or anything to keep parties being honest and accountable, it's kind of neither here nor there, to be honest.
As far as I understand, at the end of the line, if you keep refusing to declare, I think the IEC can fine you, but even possibly deregister you as a political party.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, then let's see if that is implementable. That would be, imagine this time next year, the EFF gets struck off the roll because they haven't been declaring their Mazotti dollars. No, I'm kidding. I don't have any claim to knowledge of their donations, but yeah, it can be a good thing. The one thing that I noticed in the statement was the donations that the Patriotic Alliance has, of which they are both from its leader, Gator McKenzie. So it's kind of like, okay, there's just so many loopholes. Somebody can give them to him and then he can give it to the party. And so you can't really follow a paper trail. But if it brings out some sort of accountability and openness in our democracy, then I don't see any problem with it. But yeah, it would be cool to see it getting some teeth if we're going to have such a mechanism.
Sara, what do you make of all this? I think that it's a very ominous sign for the ANC, which has traditionally, fundraised so much better than all the other political parties in the country, to get beaten by the DA in the fundraising stakes. I suspect that this is not a good sign.
It shouldn't be a good sign because basically anyone who is donating to the ANC at this point should be called out for having no nous whatsoever. But what I think I'll do is I'm actually going to appeal to our audience to give us donations so that we can hire a researcher to find out exactly how many members the EFF has and what they charge them, and then we can do the sums and say officially that they're lying. It's I don't know, it's a bit like sort of, the EFF should worry a little about not saying things in the same way that Ramaphosa should worry about not saying things, because given the nature of the party and the nature of its leadership, none of it makes any sense, and you're going to look for any little slip up, and be that as it may. But what is interesting is that ostensibly the opposition parties, or the parties opposition, maybe nationally, maybe provincially or locally, they're not apparently bringing in much in the way of donations. But by a significant amount. And what the DA shows, of course, is the reality of politics in general, and that is that it takes a long time and hard work to get a political party up and running to the extent that you can, consistently get a decent amounts of donations. So until the end, I'm sort of a bit kinder than Alex. I think until the IEC should have got its act together, and if it doesn't get its act together soon, no one will take what it reveals seriously, because it's like cloud cuckoo land stuff. It just doesn't make sense.
You see, we often make the point on the show that the EFF is not really an opposition party to the ANC, despite what many of its voters believe. And I think that you can see various pieces of evidence for that. As far as I've heard, and I haven't checked this for myself, but I've heard that Julius Malema has, for example, SAP's bodyguards who often support him and his own bodyguards, that the EFF in Parliament yesterday, the Speaker is much more lenient with them than with a lot of other opposition parties, despite the fact that they're sort of clearly abusing the system or breaking the rules. I mean, on the bit of the virtual briefing I was watching yesterday, EFF members referring to other members of the House, even ANC members, as drunkards and cowards, which is not exactly parliamentary language. Didn't get really any sanction for it. They don't declare their IEC donations, or they may not, I don't know. But, I wouldn't be surprised if they're not. And yet, they never really seem to get in trouble for that. And it's a little bit like how, even members of the ANC who are not in Cyril Ramaphosa's faction never really seem to get in a huge amount of trouble. And I really think that is because a lot of those a lot of the cadres deployed across the country, especially in our legal system, kind of look at the EFF and see them really as just the ANC Youth League in red. And this is part of the reason. This is part of the evidence for it. I don't know, Alex, what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to it. I mean, it's the same family, just wearing different colored clothes. Also, having I remember when I arrived at the institute at the IRR, we had just completed the media room, and seeing the EFF's new media room, there's no ways that didn't cost an arm and a leg. So no doubting their dishonesty. But yeah, I guess it's with the rumors of a sort of ANC-EFF coalition going into 2024. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, it does. It's not surprising. So, yeah, I guess the problem is that it's become adopted in the public zeitgeist as well. Like, no one expects any different either, unfortunately. So it's kind of, they get a free pass and we kind of let it happen because what are you going to do?
Right. It's the low bar. Once you set the bar low enough,
exactly.
One really demands more. Anyway, okay, so that's all quite interesting. But we're going to move on overseas to a historically important event which has happened in the last 24 hours. And that is, of course, that one of these sort of great, important titans of history, Mikhail Gorbachev, has died at the age of 91 in Moscow. Mikhail Gorbachev was, of course, the last leader of the Soviet Union and oversaw some of the reforms that sort of either were responding to the reality of the collapsing Soviet Union or hastened its collapse, depending on who you talk to. He's a guy with, I would say, a controversial reputation and legacy. It really depends on who you ask what their opinion of Mikhail Gorbachev is. There are many people in Russia today who blame him for humiliating and diminishing the country, for destroying the Soviet Union, for helping to cause the economic turmoil that befell Russia in the 90s. There are some in the Baltic and countries and Ukraine who really didn't like him because they saw him as a want-to-be tyrant who was simply weak and gets far too much attention. He controversially, I think in the early 90s or in the late 80s, I can't remember exactly the year, sided with the communist hardliners in suppressing a revolt in Lithuania. And the Baltic states have never really forgiven him for that. But at the same time, many people around the world, some in Russia, some in the Baltic, some in the West, hold him up as this guy who tried to fix the Soviet Union and ultimately chose the path of peace rather than sort of going down to the bitter end in a tidal wave of bloodshed as the Soviet Union was falling apart. And that he was a guy who essentially gave up his empire, who could have fought to maintain himself as ruler of the Soviet Union, but really didn't, and was a man of peace who helped end the Cold War. So, these two stories, was he a reformer who generally wanted to make the Soviet Union better, or was he a weak man who simply was an inept tyrant? I think there's probably a bit of truth to both narratives, but truly a controversial guy, but also very important for world history because he did bring about the end of the Soviet Union in many ways. He did change the communist world forever. And he has left a very big mark on the world we live in today. In many ways, he helped create the Europe that we see before us today, including some of its conflicts. Sara, what do you make of the legacy of Mikhail Gorbachev?
I don't think he was a weak tyrant. I think he was very much a man of the system. But he didn't indulge in perestroika or restructuring or glasnost, which is openness. I don't think he did it because principles or altruism, but I think there was an element of pragmatism where he saw that the Russian economy was basically imploding. And I've heard it said a number of times by historians that the Soviet Union actually only lasted as long as it did because it had oil and gas to rely on. There was pretty much nothing else about anything that the Soviet Union was producing in terms of what it could sell to its people or exporting that was enough to make it continue to be a viable economy. So the Soviet Union was going down the tubes economically, and once that happens, anything is possible. And I think he understood that, and that the moves to try and create some of this openness and some of this change were in fact to address the economics. It's not surprising that there was a lot of chaos subsequently, because it never really evolved into a thought through system. It was just a sort of change. It was relatively quickly. It had the advantage of avoiding war, but the Soviet Union was used to being able to at least threaten war, if nothing else. So I think it was. I think, in a sense, the Eastern European countries and the Baltic states, they may be critical of him, but at the same time, they exist as democracies largely aligned to the EU because of these changes. So it was a set of changes, the outcome of which could not begin to be predicted. I think the Russian people had experienced democracy for about 10 minutes in 1917. So they were it was never been a significantly democratic country at all. So the whole thing, the fact that it ended up in a bit of flux, and he went this way and he went a bit that way, and then he eventually gave up power, there was no prescription for it. And I think to a large extent, he did unalterably change the Soviet Union. It ceased to exist. The only problem is that the nature of Russian autocracy came around in a circle towards Vladimir Putin, and he's the embodiment, even though it's not actually the Soviet Union that he wishes to embody. He wants to go back further in history, but he's the embodiment of what Gorbachev was unintentionally or intentionally trying to get rid of. And that, I think, is a tragedy for the Russian people.
There was a famous advert in the 90s where two Russians are arguing over the legacy of Gorbachev. It was a Pizza Hut advert. And one is saying, oh, he destroyed the country, and the other one is saying, no, he brought us freedom. And an old woman stops him and says, no, he brought Pizza Hut. And that was kind of one of the, and Gorbachev himself appeared in this Pizza Hut ad, which is also very weird, from leader of the Soviet Union to being in a Pizza Hut ad. But
I imagine.
Yeah, probably. But one of the sad things I think about how things have turned out since then is that Pizza Hut has now left Russia. So in a sense, a lot of the stuff I think he tried to do in the Soviet Union are now gone. Alex, you like me grew up in the sort of post-Gorby, the post-Gorbachev world. What do you make of his legacy?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what's important, especially for sort of our generation, the more born-free cohort, is history is complicated. There's no one side to a person's personality, and I think what's interesting is, as we have these new characters like Putin and the sort of the new gen, and with the passing, well, I think it was last year, of F.W. de Klerk, all these guys who made all these decisions and had ramifications for what kind of democratic or non-democratic societies we live in today. So I think it's important that we remember these, and I think there's a lot to be learned from that little passage of history, especially for our generation, and sort of the values and principles that are so much at play there, and notwithstanding the how important the economic how economics inform those decisions. So a lot for our generation to learn there. And yeah, I think people should just be attentive to that, and hopefully, yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to learn more about his history, and yeah, hopefully we can learn from it, and we can get Pizza Hut back to Russia.
Indeed. The more Pizza Huts, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Although that itself is a controversial opinion. But anyway,
and this we're not being paid to. We're not being paid to.
Yeah, we're definitely not.
Just disclaimer: we won't put a Pizza Hut link in the description below.
Anyway, yeah, all I can say is rest in peace, Mr. Gorbachev. You are left behind a very different world. Okay, that is all the time we have for today. And we hope that you enjoyed the show. We hope that you found it interesting. And we will, of course, be back tomorrow for the Daily Friend Show. Check out our sponsor, Bitvice. Also, check out the IRR's Friends campaign. That's irr.org.za. You can find info about our campaigns and how to become a friend of the Institute there. And otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Cheers, everyone.